Welcome to the Immeasurable Podcast at the Krishnamurti Center in Ojai, California. This series reflects upon Krishnamurti's work and how it directly impacts the listener. The invitation is to inquire together into the fundamental nature of our existence.
So I'm Henry Fischer, and I'm here today with Jaap Sluijter and Francisco Mazza. Jaap Sluijter is the executive director of the Krishnamurti Foundation, and Francisco Mazza is the director of marketing and development. And together we all essentially produce the Immeasurable Podcast. The aim of today's discussion is to tease out a few of the questions that the audience has raised and to show a little bit of our process about what may make this podcast different, some of the challenges that we encounter. So we're just going to kind of get into it and take it from there and see where it goes. So, to start with, I'll ask, really what makes this podcast different from maybe the standard interview style podcast we see out there, where someone just asks a question and receives an answer from an expert. How is what we're doing with the Immeasurable Podcast different? Would either of you like to speak about that?
Well, there are different components that we have to. There's not one thing, and also the podcast is not necessarily defined, and we allow for creative leaps when they come. And then there are maybe, as I see it now, two big directions that we're trying to go. The first direction, and in contrasting it with interview, meaning somebody has some knowledge, we ask questions to tease out the knowledge. That's not really our interest. It's like we, as represent working with the Krishnamurti Foundation of America, our main objective is the dissemination and of course preservation of Krishnamurti's work. What our objective is somehow to place some of the main concepts between quotes, because Krishnamurti didn't really talk in concept, but the main concepts of what Krishnamurti was talked about and verbalized into the current time, the questions of current times. So what you see is that currently many speakers, podcasters, teachers are looking at questions like consciousness, conflict, the nature of the human mind, the nature of psychology. What is the anatomy of conflict, anatomy of fear? What is what is required to bring about a good society? And so part of our discussion is somehow to contrast what various speakers are saying with what Krishnamurti is saying. And the objective might sometimes simply be to tease out semantics, because a lot of this discussion is about semantics. I would use the word I as the self, I as thought, and somebody else would use the I as the eternal self, and more in an Advaita or in a Vedanta way, or a dualistic, non-dualism way. So we have to somehow build a bridge first in semantics, so we know, okay, we're talking about the same thing. And then we somehow want to put, if there's contrast or if there's alignment, we want to put a light on that and saying, hey, this is what our understanding is of what Krishnamurti is pointing at. And this is what you seem to be saying. Now, what can we say? Can we explore this? So I feel that is like the first big strand of what we're trying to do. And then the other, continuing from that, is it possible to explore these questions also while we're sitting here? So, meaning, okay, if you ask me, at this very moment, what is consciousness, I can probably come up with many different definitions from many different disciplines about consciousness. And I can, because say them aloud, and that has a place, but that's not the main place for what we're doing here. So is it possible to look at a particular question? Does human conflict arise in consciousness? And can we from scratch, without any prerequisite, without any prior knowledge, investigate into that question? None of the speakers or none of the participants being an authority on it, but just, okay, you know, you have your knowledge, you have all your information, but now if you start, where do we go with this question if we have to investigate it afresh? So, I mean, that's my 2 cents for the moment. Yeah.
And why is that? Why then, if we bring up something like consciousness, wouldn't we just read what Krishnamurti says or watch a talk on what Krishnamurti said about consciousness? Why is it important that we go into what we think consciousness means or what we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends for the moment where we are in the discussion. If I want to say what Krishnamurti says about consciousness, I better read or quote him accurately or paraphrase him accurately, right? But if we have a larger question around that, like what is consciousness? And then there's a how we communicate. There's a viscerality to it, right? There's an active, you know, the word is mapping upon an experience we have. Mm-hmm. And in order to bring out that experience, we have to start with somehow connecting to that experience, right? Like, otherwise it's information. Like if I start with, okay, consciousness is a word, and I know about the word this and that, then then it's knowledge. But if I connect to the experience, and maybe the illusion in the experience, that might also be. We're not saying that experience is king, right? But if you at this very moment have to point within yourself, what does the word consciousness map onto within yourself at this very moment, then you somehow can start from there. And then it's more like a talking from something than talking about something. And that is different from if you want to get right what Krishnamurti says, because then you have to quote him, I feel.
Yes, I wanted to add that somehow maybe we are making this distinction between talking from something and instead of talking about something. But it's almost like even in that distinction, I think there is an exploration that needs to happen, because it's like, are we actually saying that there is a way of experiencing life which which is not only information, right? There is some kind of experiential thing, and what does it actually mean to actually look at something from that perspective? It's almost like, yeah, what you are saying is coming from the experience that you're having at the moment. So, but with questions like what is consciousness, that's quite, this is a very wide question, and I guess what we are trying to present is a framework from us to explore that. But already in there is built in the unknown, right? So is this even possible, right? To actually have something that is kind of in a way going beyond thought.
Interesting. And just sticking with you, Francisco, since you're talking, and you are particularly involved in the development of the immeasurable itself. What would you say that the podcast is trying to accomplish? Jaap touched on it, and you touched on it a little bit, where you mentioned we're moving to exploration of what Krishnamurti's asking us to look at. I mean, he's asking us to look at it and to make it real, to touch on something that's visceral. The word we used was visceral. Also, that there's some kind of experience or that takes it away from just being information. He touched on that. Are there other things we are trying to accomplish by putting the podcast out there and involving a lot of different people in relation to Krishnamurti's teachings, in exploration of Krishnamurti's teachings?
Yeah, well, I feel that this has been a work in progress, and we are still there. What I personally, what I would like to see happening in this space is it's a way of making, in some way, the teachings are always touching problems that are already with us in society and within ourselves, but sometimes that is not explicit for the majority of I would say, of the world. So only people that are interested in the teachings maybe get that connection. So I wonder if through this podcast we are able to make more than a connection, is like make it explicit. It's like in which way the teachings are relevant to what's happening out there and what's happening inside ourselves. And I think that is the way that an exploration can help, because if in the moment that it becomes just a solidified, scripture, and we're just reading from what he wrote, again, that gap remains, which is like, yes, I see it there written in text, but what does it actually mean in my life? Something along those lines.
Right. I see what you're saying. It kind of touches on one of my next questions, even about why we don't just have Krishnamurti content on the podcast, which obviously half of our content are Krishnamurti talks, but why the other half isn't also Krishnamurti talks. It seems like it's important that this becomes an kind of an active inquiry, and we see that regular everyday people now are asking or exploring these questions themselves actively, right?
Yeah, maybe I have to say here, Henry, that the podcast is one element in a multi-pronged activity of the Krishnamurti Foundation of America. Like, of course, the foundations, even internationally, together with the English and the Indian and the Spanish Foundation, we made sure that all the teachings are available. All the videos are available online for free. We have a website called jkrishnamurti.org that has all the text and also all the videos, again, available for free. Then we're developing all kinds of other platforms also directly to make different aspects of the teachings more accessible and easier to look at. So the podcast is a complementary aspect where we somehow trying to look what is in the blogosphere or the podcast world. What we see are the questions that are being discussed, and what are the underlying questions, especially in the podcast, of course, related to more spiritual or social issues. And what is the aspect of Krishnamurti's teachings that would really, I think, in as far as our understanding, inform or deepen that discussion. And I think, and that's what somehow aligns with what Francisco is talking about. That sometimes the alignment or the connection is not easily made, right? Like Krishnamurti would throw out a statement like, "The observer is the observed," which looks like an abstract philosophical statement that has a good place on a dusty shelf in an archive somewhere in a university or somewhere, and then occasionally you look at it and say, "Wow, let's put it on a tile for the bathroom." But it's but that statement, if you unravel it, has directly implications on how we interact as society with each other. The whole question of identity, for example, how is that related to the observer is the observed? Where I try to make I separate myself from myself and determine who I am. How valid is that whole process? And so who am I in that sense? Who am I in my head, thinking about issues and taking a standpoint in something? Well, and that's what Krishnamurti says, right? That the observer is the observed is an illusion. You think you can separate yourself and make declarations about yourself. I am this and I am that. I believe this. And you say, well, this process is flawed. And you have not only for that particular political opinion you might have, but that it's fundamentally flawed. So you have to look at it from a fundamental way, not just to change your opinion on a particular subject. It's not about that. I mean, we're not interested in arguing a particular political or social agenda. I think that's not our place. I mean, of course, all of us have opinions, but we try to stay to the bigger context in all this.
So you're saying in some way that this is one part of a larger, almost like a web or a net that we're casting.
Yes.
So the podcast is one part of it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And Francisco, did you have anything to add to that at all, or anything that Jaap was bringing up there that you'd like to speak to?
Well, only to say that, this web or this ecosystem that we are building, so it has to include all the different stages of interest, even in regards to the teachings. So you can have somebody that is just, starting exploring these questions, and by having, by us having an Instagram account or a podcast episode with somebody that this person is following, they start getting familiar with the teachings, right? And then you have this other aspect, which is how to go deeper into any of these things. And of course, teachings being the core of this. So in that way, I feel like you can see how we can spread the dissemination at the level that it could be seen as superficial, meaning a Facebook post, but then also allowing anybody that wants to go deeper into the teachings to have that material also available for all of them. And that's what jkrishnamurti.org does, and the international YouTube channel. So it's a play between these two things, I would say. Like we go wide, but we also want to, people to go deep into these things.
And to touch on, another piece that's been a bit of a controversy in some ways at times with the podcast. I mean, we've included some very notable public figures. We had Rupert Sheldrake, we had Charles Eisenstein, Byron Katie, we're having Rupert Spira coming up, and others. What is are we trying to do something different in our approach with these individuals? Because, oftentimes in an interview format, you're finding out what the work of that person is, right? So it could be seen as a stage for bringing out the individuals that we're having discussions with, bringing out their works or their perspectives or their ideas. And I guess my question is, what's our reason for interviewing these people who have their own teaching, in a sense? I think I could go as far as say that. It might even be considered by some as gurus. I know that is a challenging dance to have when the Krishnamurti Foundation is about the work of Krishnamurti and disseminating Krishnamurti's teachings. So how do you see that line being effectively walked between not promoting another person, but not putting them on any kind of pedestal, not giving someone an authority, when in the world, a lot of these figures have a certain authority in their field? So how do you reconcile that? is it necessary to? I just have some questions around that, and maybe it's just something you or Jaap could kind of expound on.
Well, there are many angles to it, of course, but the people you just mentioned, they all articulate, of course, their own views, but in a way they don't articulate only their own views. They articulate a particular, how would you say, archetype, an archetypical way of looking, and or an archetypical solution to something, right? Like how do you solve the problems of society, or how does humans progress, or how does change come about? And I feel now I'm on the top of my head. I feel like with Charles Eisenstein, we really looked at his work on his choice, the place of choice in his work. And then we tried to contrast that with what Krishnamurti says about choice, and that was a main thrust with Rupert Sheldrake. Of course, we wanted to follow up with him because he had the discussions he had about the nature of the mind with Krishnamurti are, for many of us who have been studying Krishnamurti's work, really very important, because that's where one place in his work where Krishnamurti really went into psychology, psychological problems, and the nature of the mind. And then with Byron Katie, of course, we went into the whole idea of progress, right? How do we as individuals grow? And what does it mean to grow? And what does Krishnamurti say about the instant change, right? And don't accept time. So to put people to somehow speak and engage with people who have really gone deep into this, because all the people that we mentioned before have gone really deep into it. Robert Spira is a non-dualist teacher. He's a Vedanta, and Krishnamurti has talked about that. So we want to contrast that also. What is it when you say "I am that," right? Which is a very popular statement, of course, especially made by Srini Sakadatta, but also by the whole Vedanta, actually. Now, can we bring that out? The questions, and then after we can bring it out, clear up the semantics. Get clear what the issue is, what is implied in the question "I am that," and then go beyond that by exploring the question without any preconceived knowledge. I think that is a fantastic challenge, and a very interesting challenge, I feel.
Yes, and let me add to just to give maybe for me the way it works, in the way I frame this is so also the teachings are pointing at something else. I mean, the teachings in itself, in themselves, somehow you could say it's a description. Like he managed to verbalize something, but it has to be something where this is pointing at. So all these different, let's call them teachers in quotes, that have studied or gone through this investigation, there has to be something there that probably is pointing at the same place. So I guess it's also an exercise in trying to engaging with them, and trying to maybe clarify and see if anything else would emerge in this conversation, which is about that, whatever that is being pointing at, I would say.
Interesting. You're kind of setting up, I think, all of what you've shared so far, both of you, more or less brings, I think, us to one of the biggest challenges really with the podcast, which is how in some way this is an open exploration for us, right? This is, we're learning as we go, and we're exploring these questions actively as we go through. So would it be fair to say that And or I guess I would ask, as others are listening to the podcast, do you see ways that they could beneficially interact with the podcast? For example, if they're interested in these questions, would we then invite them to do programs at the foundation? If they're interested in the questions, should they send us their feedback? Is there an opportunity for people, if they're very interested, to appear on the podcast? How does the podcast go from looking at these being kind of, we don't want the podcast either to become static, just as Jaap was bringing up in the beginning, the teachings of K can't just sit there on a shelf, right? They have to, the action is actually looking at the questions that are posed and challenging one's own life. What are the opportunities to do that with this podcast? Meaning, are they a starting point? I think you mentioned that there's courses people can go more deeply into, like online courses that would further some of the questions the podcast may bring up. Is that operational? Is that set up for people to take advantage of now?
Yeah. I mean, as Francisco said, there's a whole ecology, and depends on which starting point you enter into this. Like some people enter it just by some Krishnamurti tape showing up on their YouTube video stream, and from there maybe they come on the Immeasurable, and then they arrive on the Immeasurable Podcast, and then they see there's an international teachings website, and maybe they see the Krishnamurti Foundation website and their programs, their online programs, their online courses to go to study the teachings with others. There are dialogues, online dialogues, the dialogue programs. So there's a whole variety of things that can be done but don't need to be done. I mean, the majority of the people just studies by themselves. I mean, we, right. As you maybe know, we have on our campus in Ojai, we have students living with us for maximum a year, between half a year and a year. And today we got an application for a student, and he said, well, for years I'm interested in all this, in an outskirt in Alaska, and I've never bothered to engage with anybody on this. So we know there are people everywhere. I mean, it doesn't require, being interested doesn't require anybody to engage with others. I mean, you can, if that's your interest, if you feel like sharing this. And I guess that's maybe depending on someone's aptitude, someone's personality. That is so. I wouldn't say that there's I don't want to recommend anything to anybody.
But there are options.
There are options. Yeah.
And also, how people interact with this content in different ways, right? From a book to a website, and the podcast also. It would be good also to mention that we do have episodes of original recordings of Krishnamurti with small group discussions and similar. So there is also the possibility of engaging with the original Krishnamurti content through the podcast, and I feel like there is, for us, is important to keep an eye on how the formats change over time. Now people are listening at the moment. It seems that's kind of an important movement towards audio and audiobooks as well. And another extra, just to say something about that, seems to be something that we would like to pursue, is this new app called Clubhouse, which is, in a way, it's like you need to think about it like an interactive live podcast where people can have you have a presenter, and you have the other people that connect to this room, and they listen to each other, and they can have a dialogue. And so that's another entry point seems relevant for the times that we're living.
Interesting. So it sounds like there are a number of new media options that are also coming up. So in some ways, the podcast may also be a place where people can kind of check in on new kind of innovative ways of dialoguing together. Every once in a while, I guess on the podcast, we may update people on other opportunities to engage,
Right.
essentially. And
Yeah, no, there's one aspect that I feel what I am excited about with, which we haven't mentioned so far, is like when we discussed with Ruben Sheldrake about the nature of the mind. I mean, one of the things was that what I was hoping that it would direct people with an interest, more psychological interest and an interest in Krishnamurti, that there's a treasure of material in that particular series. And so I'm aware, because in total there's about 550 different video recordings of Krishnamurti and about 3,000 audio recordings of Krishnamurti. And on top of that, you have books that are written about, we have published about 80 books, and Krishnamurti wrote maybe about 20, 30 books, and then you have, there are quite a few books that we don't have original audio recordings from, like the 1930s. Now, because we work a lot with this material, and I have, my history, of course, with Krishnamurti's teachings is very long. And I started as a teacher, and like I would really hope at a certain point to do more on Krishnamurti and education, especially what he has said, in the discussions at Brockwood, but also in Ojai, because at a certain point in my life also, I went really deep into that. And I think people wouldn't be able to find it if you just start from scratch and you click Krishnamurti and education, you come on an audio or on a video. So I hope we can also direct people to interesting material where Krishnamurti brings out a certain aspect which we feel is really worthwhile listening to, and sheds a light on his work, especially on his educational work, which hasn't been done. I think especially the educational bit didn't get enough light and is often reduced to very simplified notions. Krishnamurti is about non-competition or no fear or something. That's of course true, but that's just the beginning part. And maybe we also want to, and we have lined up at least already one scholar on Krishnamurti's work, on the educational work, and we hope to bring that out further in the near future.
Great. A few comments, and then maybe we'll get into a question or more, and then maybe we'll finish. Just on my side, just a mention about the programming of the podcast, that we try to keep the programming fairly dynamic and not to get too stuck in any one area. There obviously are Krishnamurti's talks, but we also have, explorations, interviews. We look at aspects of the foundation, even like the residential program. We may do musical concerts, classical musical concerts. Just that there's all kinds of different ways, so we don't get caught in any kind of groove. So in some ways, the podcast it has an experimental element to it. And I'd also say because of that, and I think some concerns our audience at times has raised, and I know will continue to raise, is often we don't see what we're actually doing behind the curtain. We're only conscious of what we're conscious of, so to speak. So I think there's a fear that, Krishnamurti may have been someone who was so transparent, able to see so many of the subtle aspects of the mind, that then when we include a podcast and we have different teachers or a person like myself or us, it begs the question, well, is the discussion going to be limited by what we don't see? And I think what the main gist I see with the podcast is we're taking that as a starting point and not an end point. So we're not saying that because we don't see those things, we'll just remain silent and only read what Kay has to say and not talk amongst one another. Instead, we'll say, we don't see, so we're in this together. We're in this. I hope our audience knows that they're in this process with us together. This is very, very egalitarian. We're all exploring these questions, and exploration in some sense can be the great equalizer, because we don't know what we don't see, but we are asking questions to perhaps have some kind of insight. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and more than that, and maybe that's we didn't clarify that in the beginning, and I think maybe that's we don't claim to be authorities on Krishnamurti's teachings. None of us. It's actually interesting because when I read a book and 10 years or 15 years later I read the same book and I said, wow, this is completely different than how I remember it. So I don't claim to know, but I do claim to have read a lot and listened to a lot. And and people, I'm just inviting people to leave comments. We do I don't read all the comments, but the people in our organization do read everything, and the ones that stand out, we do hear about, and we see them. So they're being shared. So there is a feedback system. And also ideas, if there's ideas or subtleties, yes, please share them. And maybe one thing, we don't assume that this podcast is for everybody. As we said, this is just part of an ecology. Mm-hmm. We know there are some people who read Krishnamurti, who are very serious about this, and they actually prefer that we stay with the literal text only, the audio or the video only, the audio or the text only. And for those people, for them, they don't need to listen to the podcast. I would recommend them not to do that, because you'll just get irritated. And but for others who are exploring and maybe unfamiliar, or are familiar but like to hear what others think about it, or like to have questions raised, or like to hear things that they agree or disagree with. That I think it's a live format. All the people that show up have worked their way into this stuff. There's not a casual bystander that just comes in and starts talking. So that's my 2 cents on this.
Yeah, I was just thinking also how difficult it is to put this forward in a way. Sometimes we talk about we, and sometimes we go back to I, myself, and I just get the sense that ultimately is maybe what Jaap was pointing at, that we are these individuals very interested in these topics, and that's kind of the equalizer, really. There is no authority, and somehow also the teachings really point to that level of connection, which is like the human condition. And that's also another really important equalizer in another way, that there is no politics, there is none of those levels are really the important one that we want to discuss. It's more about how do you call that that other level, the deeper connection of the human condition, which is what I think the teachings are pointing at.
Yeah, and the other aspect is maybe good to mention is that it's not, this doesn't, these discussions, like the discussion we have now, or the exploration we have now, is not happening in a vacuum. I mean, the 3 of us and some other people also, which I hope we're going to include soon, we have intense discussions and disagreements and agreements on all these topics. We're not aligned in everything. These are really individuals that have their own opinions, and we're willing to explore. And sometimes we meet, and sometimes we don't meet. But I feel, but there's a lot of exploration going. This is not separate from our lives, right? This is really
Right.
something that on a day-to-day basis we're looking at this. This is our life. This is our thing.
Yeah, and I think all of this is all of these different, ideas, ways of approaching the topic, ways of looking at Krishnamurti's teachings. They seem to coalesce a little around this bigger question that is happening throughout the podcast world, is happening in our daily lives and in our relationships, which seems to me, how do we address the conflict that we see in society, or how do we somehow meet the issues? I don't necessarily, certainly you could call them certainly problems, but I think at their root there seems to be a lot of conflict. And would it be fair to say that, I guess my question to both of you is, what's the reason for doing all this? Why explore the teachings at all? As and like you said, we're giving a lot, if not our whole life, to this exploration, right? It's a really a dominant interest, and why? What's the point?
Well, I would say there's more than of course, society and is one aspect, right? Of course, and I think from any point in society, in history, you might say, well, looks like a very terrible situation, and maybe at any time when you say that, it's true, right? My father would talk about the Second World War and everything that happened, and was a terrible situation, and many times I think about his situation and I think, oh wow, my life is so much simpler than his life at the time. He had really reasons to say life is terrible, right? But so we have the political, economical, social situation that any, I think, sensitive person has to put questions to. But I think the encompassing question is, at what level do you address the question? Do you address the question on the manifestation, which you have to at a certain point, of course, if you don't change education, you miss out on an opportunity to impact society really. If you don't change healthcare, if you don't change the political system, if you don't change opportunity for people, then there's an issue. But from Krishnamurti's work, he would say the outer is a manifestation of the inner. Unless the inner changes, the outer will change. So to redirect the focus to the structure and the fabric of our psychology, of our psyche, and then see what is possible within that realm, right? And then, of course, we throw away ideology. We challenge ideology, any ideology. I say throw away, which I believe, but I think I would be open to challenge it. I would throw away or challenge belief systems as a matter of fact of that would change the inner, right? I don't say there's no place for religion, but I'm just saying that you cannot impose change from the outside on the inside. And then you have the whole question of control. Now, what will bring about a real change? Now, and then Krishnamurti, in many of these dialogues, he will go then further. What is then the purpose of life? Is the purpose of life just to have a peaceful society? Or what is the human? What is the human going to do within that society? how is the human mind going to grow? One of his concerns was, okay, if automation and computers advance, what's going to be left of the human psyche? Are we going to be all fully occupied with entertainment. And because we have so much time on our hands, all our immediate needs are being taken care of. So what is the human psyche for, right? Does it have a capacity that's beyond that? And that's where and that area is of course very difficult to explore, but he would say there is something beyond that, the immeasurable. That's why the title, The Immeasurable, is there. That relates, that somehow is now how can I loosely frame it, but somehow is an overlap or a connection between all of nature, all of the universe, and the human psyche, and that these are not that these things are not fragmented in that. So, yeah.
Yes. So yeah, it's almost like an overview. It doesn't do justice, but it's of the whole movement of life, right? Like looking at this as a whole, integrated as an integrated whole somehow. But I wanted to add, apart from another of these obstacles in quotes, is the analytical mind, right? Like how like Jaap started saying how to talk from something as opposed to about something, but that's our habit, right? To go and analyze and in a way create all these fragments, and it seems that we seem to be, that doesn't really capture what Kay was pointing at. So I think that's one of the challenges in any of these discussions.
Beautifully said. Yeah, did either of you, I think, have anything else to add, or does that sound like a fairly good place to start to wind it down?
Yeah, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned in closing that we have, a fairly dynamic season of programming ahead, and as we pointed out, there's hopefully something for everyone, and of course, the podcast is not for everyone, as Jaap mentioned, but we have the K Talks, we'll have explorations, we'll have interviews, we'll have information, we may have special events. So, keep posted if one thing doesn't suit you. There may be other things that do. For example, last season we had an 8-part Krishnamurti series. So just Krishnamurti's talk in Malibu in 1970 could be followed through that entire 8-part series. And yeah, I'd also mention if you have questions or concerns or ideas, you can always reach out to us at podcast@kfa.org. Yeah, and we look forward to taking the journey with everyone and learning as we go. So thanks, Jaap.
Thanks, Henry.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco.
Thanks, Francisco.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.